everyone, it's been a while since I've made a video series, but I've gotten a lot of questions around things that have to do with pitch and intonation and how to get better at those things. So I thought I'd make a video series to answer those questions. There's actually a number of different skills that go into intonation and pitch related things, namely pitch discrimination, being able to tell the difference between two pitches, the ability to sing in tune, the ability to audiate, so imagine what pitches sound like in your head, and then all of the application on the instrument, so like the motor skills and the motor training to actually put what you can hear in your head onto the instrument. This series of videos is going to be less heavy on the science and more heavy on the practical application and how you actually practice these things. So let's start with pitch discrimination, the ability to tell the difference between two pitches. This is obviously a really important skill for playing in tune because if you can't hear the difference between a G and a slightly sharp G, it's going to be really hard for you to tell if you're in tune or not. So there's an app that I often recommend to people called InTune. I'll put a link in the comments below for you. But basically what this app does is it plays you two pitches and you have to tell if the second one is higher or lower, and then you swipe up if it's higher, swipe down if it's lower. The pitches gradually get closer and closer together until you essentially can't hear the difference anymore, and it tells you, what percentage of a half step you're able to hear. If you practice with this app regularly, your ability to hear smaller and smaller and smaller differences in pitches will improve. There's research on this that shows that you don't actually need all that much practice. When they took non-musicians who had much worse pitch discrimination than professional musicians, when they trained them for only 4 to 8 hours using an app like this, they found that the non-musicians were able to get to the level of the musicians. So 4 to 8 hours, not that much practice. So that's the first step, making sure that you have really, really fine-grained pitch discrimination so you can tell the difference between two pitches that are really close but not quite the same. Next is singing. There's a lot of research on this looking at, does it help people to play in tune when they sing? And the short answer is singing, just to sing, is not going to help you play in tune, but singing what you are trying to play in tune will help. So what this means is if you are working on something and you're having a hard time playing it in tune, try singing it. Just take a little bit at a time, just a single phrase or maybe a single measure, and try to sing that part on the right pitches in tune. If you can't, it's going to be a lot harder for you to play it in tune. Similarly, if there's a single note that you're really struggling with, and I would say that this is the most common, at least in my experience, that there's just a single note in a passage that you can't play in tune for the life of you. My guess is you can't sing it either. So what you want to do is you want to stop before the note that you can't play in tune and then try to sing it or hum it or whistle it, however you're comfortable. Try to do that out loud. My guess is you'll find that you don't actually know what it sounds like, that your voice will be kind of going all over the place, or you'll be singing a totally different pitch. Once you can stop the note before the note that's out of tune, sing the note that's out of tune in tune, and know, yes, that was the right pitch, and you were confident in it, then being able to play that note in tune will be a lot easier. You can also refine your singing skills by using this to practice simple things like scales. So for instance, you could play the first note of a scale on your instrument, then sing the second note out loud, then play the third note, then sing the next note out loud. So alternate singing and playing like that. You could also practice different intervals this way. So if you're trying to get better at playing, let's say, major thirds in tune, you could give yourself the bottom note of a major third and then sing the top note of the major third and then play the top note of the major third. So sing first, then play. Anything you're struggling to hear, that's really going to help you. Next up, audiation, the ability to imagine what things sound like in your mind. There's a reason why all musicianship classes and ear training classes focus so much on audiation, because it's a really, really important skill for being able to play in tune. You obviously can't be singing out loud in a performance, right? To make sure that you're in tune, you need to be able to anticipate what something is going to sound like before it comes out of your instrument. Whenever you're playing, you should be hearing ahead what you're about to play. And if you can't imagine what it's going to sound like, it's going to be a lot harder to play on your instrument. Audiation is a really difficult skill for most people. So if you struggle with it, you're not alone and nothing is wrong with you. It's totally normal to struggle with audiation. So one of the easiest ways to start working on your audiation ability is to play a note on your instrument and then try to imagine exactly that note in your head. So play a C, imagine a C, play a C, imagine a C. Just go back and forth with one note like that, and I think you'll find that it clarifies itself pretty quickly. Once you can do that, then like I was suggesting with the singing, try doing it with a scale. So play the first note of a scale, then audiate the second, then play the third, then audiate the fourth. So every other note will be inside your head. A scale is usually something that people know what it sounds like, but if a scale is too confusing for you to audiate Mary Had a Little Lamb or some tune that you know really, really well, alternating between playing and audiating. You can also practice your audiation ability by imagining any old note in your head and then singing it out loud to see, can you sing what you audiated? Can you have those two things match? For some people, that's a really easy thing to do. For other people, it's really difficult, or they might not know if what they heard in their head matches what came out of their mouth when they tried to sing. Again, if that's you, that's totally normal. That's fine. The more that you practice that, the easier it will get. You can also practice this with different intervals if you're trying to get better at hearing different interval sizes. Give yourself a starting pitch and then decide, okay, I want to sing a perfect fifth above that. So then audiate a perfect fifth above your starting pitch, then play the perfect fifth above your starting pitch and see if those match. And so you can work on it little bits at a time like that. I get a lot of questions about ear training, specifically like hearing different intervals. And I think the mistake that a lot of people make is starting with all the intervals at once. That's way too much information for your brain to try to absorb, especially if it's something that you're trying to get better at. So start with just 2 intervals. Maybe you're going to start with major thirds and minor thirds. And so start by playing the bottom note of a major third, audiating the top note, and then singing the top note out loud. Check yourself on the piano. Then play the bottom note, audiate a minor third above, play a minor third above, check yourself on the piano. And once you can do major thirds and minor thirds, both going up, like I was just describing, and down, so the opposite, once those are really easy and clear, then move on to a different pair. So maybe you'll do perfect fourths and perfect fifths next. You do it in the same way. Once your fourths and fifths feel good, then maybe you're going to do major and minor thirds and perfect fourths and fifths. And again, do it in the same way. So give yourself a starting pitch, audiate the second pitch, either the top one or the bottom one, whichever way you're practicing, then sing out loud, then play to check yourself. If you add just a few intervals at a time like this, it's much more digestible for your brain and you'll be able to hear them and remember them more easily. Once you've gotten good at single notes like this, then you can expand it and make it harder. So the exercise with audiating every other note of a scale, maybe now you're going to play the first note and then audiate the next 2. So play C and then audiate D and E, play F, etc. So put more and more of the scale or the simple song or whatever you're working on into the audiation and fewer notes out in the world. And you want to make sure with your audiation that you can hear what you're trying to hear and you are clear and confident that, yes, I am hearing these notes of the scale. And that when you play whatever note you've decided to play, it doesn't seem like a surprise. It doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, whoa, that note was a lot higher or a lot lower than I thought it was going to be. It's exactly what you thought because your audiation was accurate. How do you use this in practicing your music? So I made a whole video series on mental practice, and so this falls into the category of mental practice for me. So with my music, what I will often do is, if I'm working on a passage, the first thing I'll do before I even play it actually, is I will imagine what it sounds like. Can I hear everything in my mind? Not just the pitch, but also the quality of sound, and phrasing, shaping, dynamics, all that stuff. But we're talking about pitch right now, so let's just stay with pitch. I try to imagine what it sounds like in my head. If there's anywhere that's a little bit fuzzy that I can't hear, I try to isolate just that part. And can I really imagine what that part sounds like? Once the answer is yes, I put it into the context of the phrase again, and then I try it on my instrument. And when I try it on my instrument, one of the things I'm asking myself is, are there any surprises? Are there any notes that come out of my instrument that sound different than what I heard inside my head? If the answer is yes, then after I've done it on my instrument, I put it back inside my head to imagine again, to correct whatever audiation mistakes I'd made. In my video series on mental practice, I talked about something called aphantasia, and I'm going to talk about it again now because it's relevant to our conversation. So the scientific community defined aphantasia for a long time as the inability to see anything in your mind's eye. The definition has recently been expanded to include any sense. I mention it here because I have aphantasia, both visual and auditory aphantasia. So I can't see or hear anything in my mind. It's dark and quiet in there. When people find out about this, about me, they wonder, well, how in the world can you mental practice? How can you hear pitches in your head if you have aphantasia? It's very hard for me to describe what this feels like to me, but when I hear pitches in my head, it's conceptual. I don't literally hear anything, and yet I know what things sound like. To me, when I hear things in my mind's eye, it's like a pencil outline sketch without being filled in the middle. Very, very hard to describe. Aphantasia exists on a spectrum. So some people have what's called hyperphantasia, that they can imagine things so vividly, it's like actually experiencing it. So for me, it's like I said, like a pencil outline of a pitch. If we're going to talk about it in a visual analogy, with nothing filled in the middle. So I can know what something sounds like without hearing anything really. I really, really had to practice making sure that I could audiate things because I don't literally hear anything. So if this is you, you can practice and get better at this skill. Something that I find really, really helpful is to go back and forth, like I was saying, between playing it out loud, imagining it in my mind, playing, imagining, and going back and forth in that way. I think you'll find, even if you have a hard time hearing things in your mind, that with practice like this, dedicated everyday practice, just like on your instrument, your ability to hear things in your mind will improve and will clarify, even if you don't literally hear things like me. Okay, now that we've talked about pitch discrimination, singing, and audiation, it's time to talk about actually putting it on the instrument, which is a different thing. Just because you can discriminate two pitches that are really, really close together, just because you can sing in tune, just because you can audiate clearly, does not mean you will automatically play in tune, because that is something that you have to train your motor system to do, right? If you're a string player, you have to train your finger to go down in exactly the right place. If you're a wind or brass player, it has to do with your embouchure, right? So how do you train the motor system to know how to play in tune? That's going to be part 2 of this series.